Hello and welcome to another edition of At the Edge of It All. Today joining us is Dr. Susannah Stern. She is a professor of communication. Susannah, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
And so today we're going to dive into your work that you've been studying, and it's about young people and their use of media and technology, which is something all parents are seem to have on their mind too, about how young people are dealing with social media and technology and all the things. And so we're going to dive into all of that great stuff. But before we do, I would love to start to learn more about you. How did you get interested in studying this specifically? Because it is very unique.
It is unique. I've been interested. Well, let me start by saying I've loved media since I was a kid, as most children do. I love movies, I love television, I love books. And then I went to college and I realized I could study it. But it was really in graduate school that I honed in on youth in particular and media as a focus area. Was doing a lot of research on adolescent girls in particular. And at the time, this was in the mid-90s, there was a lot of emphasis on how girls were really powerful and had a lot of agency as children. And then they'd move into adolescence and their self-esteem would plummet. They would be less likely to speak up in class, have less confidence. And so it really concerned me that girls were kind of losing their voice. In fact, there are books literally entitled kind of Losing Themselves and Voices of Adolescent Girls in Decline. And so I actually ended up doing an internship one summer while I was in graduate school. And the focus of my internship was pretty much figure out what's happening with teens and this crazy new thing called the World Wide Web. So this was like 1998, I believe. And I would just sit in this room day after day looking at web pages. And I started to come across web pages that had been created by girls, by teen girls. And they were so revealing. Girls were talking about things I'd never heard any girls talk about before, let alone share in public. They'd be talking about things that they were preoccupied by, interests, desires, goals. And it really became clear to me that the internet could provide a new place for youth expression. And that to me was very exciting. So that was what hooked me. And ever since then, I've been really interested in how do young people use media to express who they are, to form a sense of identity, to let other people know who they are. And so I started looking at personal homepages, but since then I've looked at everything from instant messenger away messages to blogs to social media. And I also got interested in, well, what are the stories that we're telling about teenagers? Now they can tell their own stories, but what are the stories that we as a society tell about teenagers? So I've looked at everything from teen films, television shows, and even the news to say, well, what are we telling teenagers about who they are, and what are we telling the adult community about who teenagers are? Because we know that also shapes how they treat them.
Yeah. So what did you find with, it seems like for teens and what we're seeing with social media too, it's a way for them to kind of express themselves. And it seems like that's what you kind of found on these web pages, right? And so what did you find about teens, about what they were sharing? You kind of touched on it, but then on the flip, what are adults thinking? I think a lot of adults maybe think that social media can be negative, but it seems like you were finding in some ways it could be a positive for them to express themselves in new ways, right?
A lot has changed, I would say. So if we're going all the way back to the mid-90s when I started studying them, this was a time when the only girls who were able to create web pages were girls who taught themselves HTML.
Oh, okay.
And so they would create their own pages, and it was kind of like, consider like a blank sheet of paper. They could put up anything they wanted. But slowly, as the internet developed, companies started to create templates for self-expression. So you think about like MySpace and then eventually Facebook and now all the other platforms. And so we went from this time where kids could say anything that they wanted to a time now where there's kind of a way you're supposed to self-present. There's kind of an obligatory content you're supposed to use. It's much more visual than it used to be. And so I think the way young people express themselves is different. Also at that time, there was no such things as likes or follows. There was no kind of quantification of your own popularity or the self. There weren't smartphones to take pictures of yourself constantly. And so the ways that young people share now is very different than it was back then. I think it's much more restricted now. And I also think more consequential for well-being. I still think self-expression is great. I'm a big fan of young people having the opportunity to speak their minds. But I also think there's a lot of kind of downsides now with social media in terms of expectations for self-presentation, self-objectification, those kinds of things. So it's a bit of a mixed bag now. Whereas initially I had kind of maybe rosy-eyed glasses, you could say, rose-colored glasses, excuse me. Now I think I'm a little more realistic about both the benefits and the potential downsides of social media for young people.
Yeah. So you're timing from grad school to studying these teens to now, you're kind of showcasing that how much has changed and how much has evolved in that time period. So a lot of it has been different, but what surprises you as you continue this study and you're constantly looking at media and tech with teens and young people? What surprises you as you look at it as it's gone through? Is there a through line at all of any of it?
The through line, I think, is that adolescent development hasn't changed. I mean, kids still are early adolescents with kind of the interest in fitting in with other people and conformity. And as they move through adolescence, they start to experiment a little bit more and gain more confidence, particularly if they have a good social network. And then, ideally emerge from adolescence with a stronger sense of who they are, because a commitment to their value system. And they use media to figure out those pieces along the way. I think what's different now is our technology is really different. And so even though biologically and cognitively adolescence hasn't changed that much, socially it's changed a lot, because friendships play out in online spaces in ways that weren't even possible before, through smartphones, through social media. And this has consequences, I think, for how young people regard themselves and how they see their friends and how they see their ability to validate their friends and the need to validate their friends and to share publicly, kind of a burden. Many of them talk about of visibility. They have to participate. So I think that complicates their social lives in ways that are really different. Adolescence development isn't different, but how it plays out in the world today, and that started, it's always been the case. New technologies have always brought up new ways of being. But certainly I'd say with the internet and then social media and smartphones, and now AI is coming on the scene, things are very different. We also have a unique situation now in the past decade, a little less than a decade, of more young people struggling with mental health. Some people tie that very directly to the rise of smartphones and social media. Other people push back a little bit on that, and there's a lot of other kind of societal factors that play a role. But I do think that young people as a generation are struggling right now in a way that I think makes more people interested to pay attention to technology and to children in general.
Yeah, and it's true. Like you said, I hadn't really thought of it this way, but teens they're all the same. We're all the same, right? We kind of go through the same things of friendship struggles, school struggles, family things, all of those things, but they're happening in different ways in today's world.
Right.
What is parents' role in that development when there are so much different factors now? You at one point you're helping your child with their friend issues or what's happening in school, and now that's also happening on social media. So do you study at all or look at what the parent's role is in this with the development part of things?
I do. I am a parent, and so I would say I became very interested from a personal standpoint in kind of what can parents do to support children as they get older and try to navigate technology. And I think, the research is relatively clear that, as with all topics, you could say with young people, that open lines of communication between parents and their children is best. So early conversations early on in young people's lives as they start to navigate technologies and media, we know is the best thing for young people. If you think about how early people give technology to their children, it's right out of the womb for many, iPads and are kind of an introductory or technology, tablets, television. So parents are managing technology from a really young age. I started focusing on smartphones in particular because I'm really interested in that adolescent stage. And that's really when we know that social relationships and friendships become especially important, is in the adolescent years. And so that's something that interested me a lot, and I have looked at in my own work.
Yeah, so we want to talk a little bit about your research where you were looking at groups of families there's a thing called wait until 8th, which is waiting until 8th grade for your child to use smart technology, right? And so you were kind of looking at parents who had been in these groups and also who hadn't, and kind of looking at how parents made decisions, and when they made the decisions, what their thought process was and all of that. So share a little bit more about this study you did.
Sure. So I interviewed 20 mothers who had been invited to join Wait Until 8th about 8 years ago. And I focused on that group because I was really interested in what was the trajectory of these families over time, because by the time I interviewed them, their kids had all reached 8th grade. And so I was curious, like, did they participate? Why did they participate or not? What happened during that time? And it was really fascinating because I found one, that the families who chose to participate and wait till 8th felt really good about it. They felt like the organization had offered them a really clear benchmark. It offered them a way to say to their children, look, we're not alone. We're not the only ones making this decision. We're part of a bigger movement, and we made a promise to wait. And so it offered them some, ability to say, it's not just us. We're not just the crazy family who is extra strict. It also allowed them to talk about why they made the decisions they did. So they started having conversations early before they even got the smartphones. So for them, it seemed really helpful. But the thing that surprised me was I expected the families who didn't participate, who gave their kids phones at an earlier age, to say, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. I regretted giving it to them so early. But they didn't. Most of them, if not all of them, said, you know what we did because we felt it was the best way to navigate the risks in the world. We wanted our kids to be safe and secure. We wanted to have them to have the ability to schedule with us, to reach us if they needed. And we were really thoughtful about, when we gave them the phone, what we would allow them to have and what we wouldn't. I should say none of the families I studied just gave their kids a smartphone at any point, just completely unfettered, and just said, do whatever you want with it. And actually, studies show that across the country, parents are, to differing extents, they are playing some kind of monitoring or restriction roles in when they give their kids smartphones. So it's not too often that someone just gives their kid a phone and says, do whatever you want. But these parents felt good about what they did too. They felt like they had used the phones to help navigate risk, and that they had raised children who had a really rich childhood because of the phone. So these were decisions that they were making when the kids were young. By the time they reached 8th grade, 9th grade, when I interviewed them, they'd gone all different directions in terms of, some families waited till 8th, some families that pledged didn't wait till 8th, but they felt like, we made the decision that was right for us. So the main take home for me is, if parents are thoughtful and employ a variety of different strategies that make sense for their family in terms of how their kids access smartphones or what they do on those smartphones, or explain why they're delaying and offer alternatives for how to spend time and connect with other kids, then I think a lot of different approaches can be valuable, and there's no one right age or one right way. That was kind of the take home I had. But also that we need to evolve. Kids grow up, their friends change, their needs change, and that sometimes mean that we as parents also need to shift and adapt what we once thought was the right way.
Yeah, did the parents at all share what their thought process was in making the decisions? I mean, you kind of touched on it a little bit, like, I want to be reachable, or their friend group has changed, but did you talk a little bit more about, okay, how did you make that final decision of, like, we're not doing this, we're absolutely not doing the cell phone, or, okay, it's 7th grade, it's 6th grade, we can give you a cell phone?
Yeah. Well, most of the parents who pledged felt like, we're not interested to give our kid a phone anytime soon anyway. So it wasn't really like a big decision point at that point. The kids were then in 3rd grade, and it was kind of felt like that's a long ways off. So it wasn't a hard decision. But as their kids got older, then they'd find, well, for example, one mother, her daughter had started a new school. She had all new friends, and she felt like the only way that she was really going to connect with all these different girls without the background of being in elementary school together was to have a smartphone to kind of nurture the relationships that she thought were really important for her child. So she at that point gave her kid his phone in 6th grade, even though she had signed the pledge. And she felt very comfortable that that was the right decision for her child. I should also note she had another daughter who came along a couple years later, and that daughter she didn't feel like needed any particular extra support with a smartphone, but she had already given her older daughter a smartphone in 6th grade, so she felt compelled to give her daughter, the second daughter, who didn't really need it as much, a phone in 6th grade to maintain family harmony. So I think it's also interesting to think about, these are individual decisions for each child, but there's also a family dynamic that parents have to pay attention to so that they can make sure that their kids get along and that there's perceived, equality among children. So there's a lot of different factors that parents are weighing as they make these decisions. I didn't see any families making these decisions lightly.
Yeah, no, definitely. And did the parents touch on at all about the impacts of once they did give the cell phone, if there was any negativity or, oh gosh, maybe I did this too soon, or maybe I should have done it sooner? Did anyone give feedback on that?
Again, you would think that I would have encountered a little bit more regret. The families who gave their kids phones earlier did, of course, have moments of tensions with their children, but they saw those as very productive opportunities to discuss, like, here are our rules, or here are our values, and here's why we want to do it. And they saw that as part of parenting, and that they felt like, if we have these conversations and these struggles now, we're setting our children up for success later, because the phones aren't going away. The families who avoided phones and delayed felt like, well, we're putting off those arguments. And they felt very successfully like they had. And so they were also appreciative that they'd just kind of delayed not only the phone, but all the kind of demands on families that come with a phone. So as I think what I'm driving at is, like, parents don't see everything the same way, in terms of, it's not like everyone looks at the smartphone and sees it as a risk. Some people see it as a risk solution, and not everyone sees rules as an obstacle, but as a learning opportunity. So I think that's what became quite clear in my study.
No, I think that's important. And I think with parents, there's so many choices that happen, right? Where do you send your kid to school? What are you going to feed them for dinner? Do they get an extracurricular activity? There's so many choices that parents are making that kind of, you're proving the point of, this smart devices are a part of that now, and you have to kind of assess each child is different. You have to assess the child and assess the situation and figure out the best choice at that moment, right?
Absolutely.
And there's so many choices.
There are so many choices, and more every day, as I think, as companies recognize that families want alternatives to smartphones. There's more technologies that are being created, variations of flip phones and dumb phones, and different ways, recognizing that kids want to connect and that parents want kids to be able to connect, but also don't necessarily want them to have unfettered access to the internet. There's a lot more technological solutions than even when I did this study a few years ago. So I think parents are trying to navigate, to the best of their ability, all of these decisions, with most recognizing that they don't want their kids to have complete freedom, but they also want them to evolve to a point where they can be responsible technology users.
Yeah. And before we wrapped up, just because of your wealth of knowledge in this space and having 3 teenagers yourself, what is your sort of take home to parents? I think we kind of touched on it a little bit, but any other insight you have on how parents can navigate smart devices and smartphones, and just with your research on the impact on teens, what are some of your take homes for parents at home that might be listening?
I think one recommendation is to listen to your children and your teenagers. It's very easy, and I'm very guilty of this, to kind of presume that you know best. I mean, I studied media and children and teens for years, and I kind of presumed I knew exactly what was right for them. But listening to them and what they're looking for, what their needs are, I think really helps a dialogue, helps them to see you as someone who is on their team. And if you have strong convictions about what you think is right in terms of their technology access, it's only right that you hear what their convictions are, and that you can maybe talk about compromises. You can talk about a longer term plan. Like, for now, we're going to do this. In time, we'll do that. I think that can be really useful with young people. So listening is something I think we could all do better, and something maybe I wish I did more, and I'm learning all the time. Secondly, kind of going with what works for your family and recognizing every family is different. The family that's next door might have a very different set of circumstances that's going to push them to make different decisions, and to be understanding that different families have those different circumstances. To communicate with your child about why you make the decisions that you do. And then thirdly, just to recognize that kids grow older, and a lot of the challenges that they face are not because of the smartphone. That doesn't mean that the smartphone isn't implicated in some way, and social media aren't implicated, but middle school in particular is a tough time for a lot of children. Going through early and mid-adolescence poses a lot of extra pressures. And so recognizing that there's a lot of things going on in kids' lives beyond just kind of the phone is something I think we can all maybe do a little bit more to acknowledge.
That's great. I love those 3 insights. I think those are really helpful for parents, for sure. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
And if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to catch our next one.